While Vladimir Putin did his best to persuade Donald Tusk in Moscow as to how threatening the construction of a missile defense system could be to the Russian Federation, its proposed location had been established. It was this airport, Rytikovo, not far from Słupsk. This airbase, with an interesting history behind it, was the place from where the German airstrike on Poland started in September 1939, as it was a German territory then. After World War II, a military unit was set up here, first commanded by a Russian pilot, Vasily Krymsky. This military base was also home to certain aircrafts, which became of high interest to the United States. An earlier version of this particular aircraft, MiG-15, was the main point of interest. A Polish pilot, Franciszek Jarecki, once took off from one here on a mission, which formerly was supposed to take him on towards Darłowo, at the Polish seacoast, but he ended up in the Danish Isle of Bornholm. He was chased on his way by Russian fighters to no avail. The plane managed to land on Bornholm and finally was intercepted by the Americans. A few weeks after his return from Moscow, the Polish Prime Minister headed off for Washington. This time, he used a commercial airplane, clearly counting on benefits to his image. The result was easy to foretell. When the Boeing was flying above the Atlantic, someone called up the Polish Airlines office at the New York airport, saying that there's a bomb on board, a 13-pound payload, as the mysterious caller asserted. This put the JFK airport emergency crews on high alert. An extraordinary escort was provided at the landing, police cars, Secret Service officers and more. The passengers were not allowed to leave the plane for an hour, and for another 2 were kept waiting in buses on the tarmac. The luggage and board space were searched meticulously. No explosives were found. As a result, the Prime Minister was late for a meeting with the Polish Americans. The atmosphere at Greenpoint was also nervous, as most of its inhabitants did not support the Civic Platform Party. This didn't mark an end to the Polish delegation's adventures. Instead of 9:30 p.m., the commercial plane took off for Washington 2 hours later. The Prime Minister's visit will also be remembered by passengers returning to Poland on the same plane the Prime Minister took to the US. Instead of reaching Warsaw at 5:30 a.m., the arrival came 5 hours later. At the outset, Prime Minister Tusk managed to present Poland as an unserious country whose leader was incapable of arriving on time for a meeting, instead paralysing the operation of his destination's country's airport, putting anti-terrorist crews on alert and detaining on board the plane himself and the regular passengers who were unlucky enough to share the journey with him. Why did the so long negotiated Polish-US agreement never put into practice? And what are the differences between the system being under construction in Rytikowo and the one once meant to be built there, in line with what the two governments talked about, for instance in 2008? I've talked about this with a person who watched the negotiations closely. A missile defense system expert, Ricky Ellison, is moreover a 3-time Super Super Bowl champion in the world's top US football league, US high school football champion, and US college football champion. Quite a series of achievements for an individual.
W szkole średniej i mistrzem Stanów Zjednoczonych w futbolu amerykańskim w koledżu. To jest kilka osiągnięć jak na jednego człowieka.
I want to take you back to 40 years ago. I remember it was a Thursday that President Ronald Reagan delivered an address on strategic defense initiative, in fact, challenging the Russians. Our country spent then, I believe, $25 billion on the building of a missile defense system to defend us against the nuclear weapons. For 20 years, the Soviet Union had been accumulating enormous military might. They didn't stop when their forces exceeded all requirements for a legitimate defensive capability. And they haven't stopped now. During the past decade and a half, the Soviets have built up a massive arsenal of new strategic nuclear weapons. Weapons that can strike directly at the United States. As an example, the United States introduced its last new intercontinental ballistic missile, the Minuteman III, in 1969, and we're now dismantling our even older Titan missiles. But what has the Soviet Union done in the intervening years? Well, since 1969, the Soviet Union has built 5 new classes of ICBMs and upgraded these 8 times. As a result, their missiles are much more powerful and accurate than they were several years ago, and they continue to develop more, while ours are increasingly obsolete. Let me share with you a vision of the future which offers hope. It is that we embark on a program to counter the awesome Soviet missile threat with measures that are defensive. Let us turn to the very strengths in technology that spawned our great industrial base and that have given us the quality of life we enjoy today. What if free people could live secure in the knowledge that their security did not rest upon the threat of instant US retaliation to deter a Soviet attack? That we could intercept and destroy strategic ballistic missiles before they reached our soil or that of our allies? I know this is a formidable, technical task, one that may not be accomplished before the end of this century. Yet, currently, technology has attained a level of sophistication where it's reasonable for us to begin this effort. It will take years, probably decades of effort on many fronts. This will be failures and setbacks, just as there will be successes and breakthroughs. And as we proceed, we must remain constant in preserving the nuclear deterrent and maintaining a solid capability for flexible response. But isn't it worth every investment necessary to free the world from the threat of nuclear war? We know it is. 20 years later, after 9/11 of 2001, we withdrew from the ABM Treaty on Restricted Development, Testing and Deployment of Anti-Ballistic Systems we had signed years earlier with the Soviet Union, which was meant to prevent our possession of anti-missile defense across the country. So, we created and deployed the defense capability for the US with the use of interceptive ground-to-ground missiles in Alaska. We deployed 6 of them 3 years later, in connection with a threat posed by North Korea and, to an extent, Iran. That movement was also to put exactly the same missiles into Poland, to defend not only the US territory from Poland, but also the whole of Europe, including the UK and other European and NATO countries, against the Iranian threat. So that fit into what the president was doing at the time and what the US was doing. The movement made the missiles ready to be deployed very quickly, which we did in Alaska. And this allowed us time to have that system on both sides of the world to defend the US and the European population from the missile threats, which were Iran and North Korea.
przed zagrożeniami rakietowymi ze strony Iranu i Korei Północnej.
The rogue missile threats, which were Iran and North Korea.
We know that Russian President Vladimir Putin, as well as the Prime Minister, was against creating such a facility in Poland. Why, if it was to be against Iran or North Korea?
Dlaczego? Skoro było to przeciwko Iranowi i Korei Północnej. Szczerze mówiąc, liczba
To be frank, the number of missiles was quite limited. I don't think there were many of them, and the Russians might have neutralized them, in fact. But let us reconsider the US influence in Europe and the potential to destroy intercontinental ballistic missiles with atomic warheads, as well as the real capacity to defend any country against such weaponry. Yet, if one country can be defended in this way, why not do it to benefit all the other countries, and, at the same time, against those with nuclear arsenal? Russia was a nuclear country in that time. The belief that without armament Poland would be safe from the Russian Federation shows the method of doing politics by the team of Donald Tusk. This is excellently shown by the strategic review documents after 2010, once the team took the reins of the presidential palace and took over the National Security Bureau, where such reviews were done. For instance, the 2010 to 2011 reading of the Strategic Review for 2010-2011 says that in the perspective of many years, Poland and the Polish security zone are not threatened by any conflict of aggression or territorial annexation whatsoever. This shows what the mindset of the team was like with respect to actual threats. So, considering all this, why bother to have a missile defense system? Iran was no threat to Poland, was it? March the 10th, 2008, 4 weeks after Tusk's visit at the Kremlin, the Polish Prime Minister arrives here, in Washington, D.C., to meet the President George W. Bush at the White House, who was the political father of the missile defense system project. Obviously, there's a lot of work to do, because it so often happens that a strategy written down on a slip of paper differs from the details we can observe in the real world. It's just to make sure that Poles feel comfortable with the system, that our experts are intensely working on the system. I mean, this issue might generate much concern and all kinds of rumours, but our intent is to demonstrate to the people that the project is a must, while at the same time there's the modernisation that ever takes place. We're cutting short the speculation regarding the intention on both the US and the Polish side. Our common intent is to cooperate on every single aspect on the global, Polish and American security, including the missile defense system. And there's a breakthrough aspect to that, namely my inner conviction that Mr. President in person and the American team can very precisely understand our expectations today and, if I may say so, Mr. President, accept our standpoint with regard to the principle of cooperation in this respect. Those empty words uttered by Donald Tusk referred to the Polish negotiation strategy, which officially assumed that Poland did not exclude its consent for the missile defense system if in exchange for investment in the Polish armed forces. Tusk referred to it as a press conference after his talk with President Bush. What does George W. Bush's and your own declaration mean with respect to the work of experts or negotiators on the details of modernisation of the Polish army? Has any schedule been assumed already, or are you considering any? What can you tell us about that in terms of practice rather than theory? The completion of this work and these negotiations must satisfy the Polish party not only in terms of negotiating the final base or systems, but also the modernisation. In the opinion of Mr. Tusk, the anti-missile base and the related permanent presence of the US troops did not, in itself, increase Poland's security. The missile defense system, if installed in Poland, must add to the reinforcement of Poland's security. The installation, without the additional elements we're referring to, the modernisation, other aspects of cooperation and politically guaranteed security. Such a system would not increase our security, in our opinion. opinion.
W naszej ocenie nie zwiększa tego bezpieczeństwa.
The point was, basically, to flood the Americans with an infinite number of postulates and conditions that fitted into the notion of modernization of the Polish army for the US to fulfill. Those actually went beyond the military confines. Just consider that one of the points addressed was the question of who, after the US missile defense system base is dismantled, would tidy up the area and take the waste away. How about the reclamation of the land? The list was so long that we can observe is a sort of inflation of conditions for the US team to meet in order for the project to be carried out at all.
Posprząta po sobie, wywiezie śmieci, jak będzie wyglądała rekultywacja gruntów. Więc to jest, można powiedzieć, tak długa lista, że mamy do czynienia z jakimś rodzajem inflacji warunków, które strona amerykańska miała spełnić, żeby ten projekt w ogóle zrealizować.
In March 2008, when the Polish Prime Minister was hosted at the White House, American diplomats and President Bush himself were aware of their Polish partners voicing innumerable conditions for the US party to be fulfilled in a package form, i.e. in their entirety, so that the Polish government and Prime Minister Donald Tusk may consent to the installation of a US missile defense system. In terms of a diplomatic negotiation strategy, it was a complete reversal of the concept based on which Tusk had visited Putin a few weeks earlier, in February 2008. He would have proposed to Putin a new philosophy of Polish-Russian relations, which was to be based on a principle of equivalence, whereby all and any problems appearing in the parallel discussions should pose no obstacle to continuance of the talks.
Że będzie stosowana zasada równoległości, czyli zasada, w której wszelkie problemy w prowadzonych równolegle dyskusjach nie będą stanowiły przeszkody do tego, żeby te rozmowy w ogóle kontynuować.
In brief then, if you don't meet our demands as to modernization of our army, we won't consent to your missile defense system. This is exactly what it meant. In various public relations, press interviews or articles, not only Donald Tusk himself, but primarily Radosław Sikorski and other, say, Prime Minister associates, to name Minister of National Defense Bogdan Klich, always approached all those negotiation elements or conditions they pose once they formed their government in autumn 2007 as a single package.
Które postawili, jak sformułowali jesienią 2007 roku rząd, traktowali w kategoriach dokładnie jednego pakietu.
When uttering these words, the Polish Prime Minister had known for a long time how the Americans evaluate the new demands made by the Polish government to the already negotiated missile shield agreement in principle. The Americans, who talked to Polish politicians, viewed this as a delaying tactic. As we can learn from a memo produced after Defense Minister Bogdan Klich's visit a few weeks earlier to the US capital.
W stolicy Stanów Zjednoczonych. W tym czasie szefem kancelarii prezydenta Kaczyńskiego
Ania Fotyga was head of President Lech Kaczynski's chancellery at the time. If one is willing to neutralize or eliminate the opportunity of a project which is very hard to attack directly, perhaps the easiest thing to do is to pose requirements impossible to meet.
Stawiać takie wymagania, które są niemożliwe do zrealizowania.
At least in the light of the documents kept at the Foreign Ministry, that meeting was something unimaginable. The document, initialed by Ryszard Schnepf, then Deputy Foreign Minister, later be Poland's ambassador to the US, contained a whole lot of puzzling items, and there's no detailed analysis of the missile defense system issue. Instead, there are several items reflecting the claims by Polish diplomats who had prepared the Polish Prime Minister's visit of how important the mutual strategic partnership between Poland and Russia was. Expressing our interest in the dialogue and pragmatic collaboration with Russia, as indicated by the affairs of visits of Polish leadership, representatives to Moscow, Minister of Foreign Affairs R. Sikorski on January the 21st and Prime Minister D. Tusk on February the 8th, 2008. We count on the Russian party to be inclined to keep up a positive atmosphere in its relations with Poland, which is expected to have a bearing on the development of our bilateral relations as well as the EU-Russian cooperation. But it was the missile defence system that proved the hottest topic of the Washington visit. This was evident not only at the meeting with the press at the Oval Office and at the press conference. The issue was central to an interview Prime Minister Tusk gave for Polish TV journalist Piotr Kraszko while still in the US. The first words President Bush said at the meeting with us, the press, were, "I would like to thank the Prime Minister for his honest words." Does it mean that you told him either the American support, the modernisation of the Polish army, or there'll be no missile defence system in Poland? In fact, yes, our conversation happened, in a sense, on the initiative of President Bush. It turned very concrete as he, following a very cordial introduction, started with a simple question. Tell me, please, are you for or against the MD system? Was it a yes-no question? Yes, but we're no dupes, so... And what was the truth? We have just learned it. Based on documents kept at the US President George W. Bush Library, as recently declassified by the Americans. Here is a record of that conversation, published for the first time ever in Poland. It namely says that the key influence factor on the fate of the American missile defense system in Poland was Donald Tusk's talk with Vladimir Putin in Moscow 4 weeks before he came to Washington. What it means is that the Polish Prime Minister had the final say on the missile defense system belonged to Moscow and not to Washington. You have to tell me what you actually mean. Do you support the development of the anti-missile defense system? There is one more thing I won't ever say in public. When I was in Russia, I managed to defreeze the relations. This is what we wanted, and that came at a price. The task was not easy. Everything went fine until the topic of the missile defense system was touched upon. And do you know what Putin said? He suddenly turned quite restless. He looked me in the eyes and said, "Okay, if you want a missile defense, fine. But the very next day, I will direct my nuclear warhead missiles at targets in Poland. If you were Prime Minister, you wouldn't have just quit it just like that." President Bush replied as follows. Russia has missiles targeted at the US. He's already threatened us, and he knows well that if he shoots one missile at our allies, we'll have him smashed. He knows that the MD is not targeted at Russia. He's just trying to threaten you. The US President explained to the Polish Prime Minister that the Russian Federation was trying to threaten Poland. But Poland's Prime Minister had apparently taken a different decision. It would be worthwhile to ask Poland's Prime Minister Donald Tusk about one fragment of the record of his talk with President Bush taken from the American archives. What did he mean by the price apparently to be paid by Poland in exchange for the improvement of relations between Poland and Russia, as mentioned to President Bush at the White House? And what was the reason that Donald Tusk, during his meeting with the US President, vowed that he would never reveal in public the details of his conversation with Vladimir Putin?
Mamy tu do czynienia z sytuacją dużej nierównowagi, kiedy siada się przy stole.
What we are dealing with is a situation of major imbalance at the negotiation table. We've seen this many a time with Western European politicians making the same mistake as they are owning up only today. On their visits to Moscow, Western European politicians tended to position themselves in a defensive situation, indeed making efforts for the visit to be successful, to demonstrate that they they have received an audience with Vladimir Putin with a tangible outcome. This being the case, the offensive party merely bills you. If you are interested in something and such signals were given by the Polish party, then, as they sought to deny their image as Russophobic, then you will have to pay for that. If you ask us, we can tell the other politicians our opinion about you. But this will cost you something. Missile defense system, hydrocarbons, Russia's extended or developed dominance in power industry. After all, it was then that the Nord Stream projects were emerging. Plus, Poland will recall its reservations with respect to many other issues. And Poland did subordinate itself to that logic that had never been generated in Warsaw. In Warsaw, some were nevertheless able to evaluate the situation realistically. It was basically the circle of the late President Lech Kaczynski, but I am certain that a lot of experts were aware of what was going on as well. This policy was not rooted in Warsaw. It emerged from the European mainstream, to which they wanted to attach at any cost, counting on some benefits for themselves.
To jest polityka, której źródło jest główny nurt europejski, do którego Warszawa chce się na wszelką cenę dopisać, licząc na tego pozytywne konsekwencje dla siebie samej.
What the Polish-US talks look like and how these talks inform the decisions related to missile defense system can also be told on base documents from Polish archives. What I mean is a memo prepared by Witold Waszczykowski, Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, who negotiated the missile defense system issues with the Americans, based on a meeting with Pamela Konrad, Deputy US Ambassador to Poland. We are told that in the opinion of US diplomats, Poland's government, led by Donald Tusk, was negotiating in bad faith, not willing to deliver what Poland's Prime Minister Donald Tusk had agreed upon with the US President at the meeting held in this place, the White House, Washington, in March 2008. According to Konrad, Washington is concerned by the state of the negotiations. Referring to the opinion of Steve Hadley, National Security Advisor, she claims that the Americans are doubtful as to whether the talks are moving on along both paths of the negotiation process, as established during the meeting between George W. Bush and Prime Minister Donald Tusk on March 10, 2008. This calls into question the willingness of the Polish partners to complete the negotiations with the present US administration. Ms. Konrad expressed her opinion that the atmosphere of the negotiations had been dominated by a series of misunderstandings that might lead to a fiasco. She stressed that Washington's intention is the opposite. It is proof that the Americans also noticed that the talks were protracted. Let me repeat, from the autumn of 2007 to the spring of 2008, I personally had no right to be part of those talks or negotiations. I resumed the talks in April 2008. But, as I said, I was told to propose the prohibitive conditions with respect to the jurisdiction, among others. As it turned out, the US team interpreted this unambiguously as the intention to slow down, to wait for a new democratic administration to come, perhaps for a better offer. As it finally appeared, the Polish team was rather reluctant to have a missile defense system base installed in Poland.
Na jakąś lepszą ofertę, no a w końcu, jak się okazało, raczej w ogóle nie chciano tej bazy tarczy w Polsce.
Did you hear this directly from your partners during the talks? The Americans obviously asked me about it. My partner, John Rood, would ask me about it as I talked to him in Washington in the summer of 2008. He would show me the reports from the Warsaw Embassy. I had to tell him openly that I had been instructed in detail to demand a number of technical and legal solutions, which, needless to add, of course, slowed down the whole process of establishing the American presence in Poland.
Nie musiałem już dopowiadać, które oczywiście spowalniały cały proces uzyskania obecności amerykańskiej w Polsce.
His political strategy was not really sophisticated. Tusk arrived here in March knowing the presidential election is due in autumn and that G.W. Bush will not be elected president again as he couldn't run for office again. On the other hand, Polish politicians knew that Bush's administration cared about completing the missile defense system contract, as it would top up President Bush's 2 terms in office and settle a fundamental issue. However, Polish politicians looked for something else. Both Sikorski and Tusk had been after their talks in Moscow, and their perspective was different. So they played for time, waiting for the host at the White House to change within months, and then the missile defense system topic would disappear.
Tutaj nikt z nadmiernego pośpiechu nie będzie już czynił fetyszu.
No one will make a fetish out of excessive haste anymore. For a thing to be good doesn't mean it has to turn up immediately. We have given each other, on a friendly basis, some time to hold tough and serious negotiations. President Bush and I didn't bother ourselves about forecasts with respect to dates, nor did we connect in any way the negotiations and the work on these issues with internal political calendars of either the United States or Poland. We felt no pressure from our American partners with respect to the timeframes or dates, and offered no illusion that everything should be ready by tomorrow. The declassified American archives, moreover, give evidence of how different the stance of Poland and that of the Czech Republic was, as far as the missile defense system was concerned. Czech President Mirek Topolánek visited Washington moments before Prime Minister Tusk, and during his talk with President Bush, he lobbied for having the missile defense system contract signed as soon as practical, including by Poland. He pointed that such agreements ought to be executed prior to the NATO summit due in Bucharest in April 2008. Prior to Bucharest, we'd like to have concluded the agreements related to the missile defense system, not just the Czech agreement, but the Polish one also. This is very important from Bucharest's point of view. We have to demonstrate that the third pillar is compliant with NATO standards and fits into the NATO umbrella.
Tak, to prawda. Dysponujemy, od tego trzeba zacząć, niesamowitym źródłem informacji na ten temat. Mianowicie ktoś w Ministerstwie Spraw Zagranicznych w roku 2014 doprowadził do odtajnienia.
For the first time in Poland, we are now showing a set of documents related to what Prime Minister Topolánek talked about, mentioning Poland. It also turns out, for the first time, that the Polish Prime Minister on his visit to Washington was aware of all of that, knowing how Prime Minister Topolánek behaved, loyally towards Poland, and yet he behaved otherwise. That's right. To start with, we now have an incredible source of information. Somebody in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in 2014 had an intelligence report declassified, a report by the Polish Military Intelligence Service containing a piece of information shared with Donald Tusk on March 6, 2008. The memo clearly says that the Czech Prime Minister Topolánek, on his visit to the White House, acted as a determined supporter of the missile defense system, knowing that what was perhaps the major component of the system, around which Putin was running incredible intelligence and diplomatic games.
I Topolánek powiedział prezydentowi Bushowi, że po pierwsze jest
That is, the special radar to be installed in the Czech Republic would not be built in Poland, if Donald Tusk left the missile defense system project.
Stronę amerykańską, prosił amerykańskiego prezydenta,
Topolanek reassured Mr. Bush that he advocated for a quick signing of the missile defense system contract, and he almost requested the American team, the US president, that they consented, in a sense, to all those terms that the Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk was certainly going to put forth on his visit at the White House. The Czech Prime Minister wanted to see the US party no less determined than himself, so that the missile defense system idea might become central to the talks with the Polish team. This very important document shows a far-reaching, indeed utmost loyalty of the Czech Republic to the Republic of Poland. Being a Pole, I regret to say that the principle was not reciprocated by Donald Tusk's government.
Ta zasada nie została odwzajemniona przez rząd Donalda Tuska.
Prime Minister Tusk did not demonstrate to the Czech Republic a loyalty comparable to the one shown by the Czech Prime Minister to Poland. However, Donald Tusk never forgot to demonstrate loyalty to the Russian Federation. That the Americans have accepted the Polish stance as a package of the missile defense system plus strengthened security of Poland may concern the Czech Republic's government, which never proposed such a postulate and has found itself on a faster route to completing the agreement with the US. Is this an issue for the Czechs only, their own problem? Are you in touch with the Czechs or somehow talking to them? Can it impact the Czech-American negotiations? I'm in constant touch with the Prime Minister Topolanek. He called me up after he returned from Washington, and I called him up after my return from Moscow. We try to hold these talks in a reciprocally loyal manner, but frankly, I do respect and of course accept the way Prime Minister Topolanek talks on behalf of the Czech government. It is based on sovereign decisions of the Czech government, and this shouldn't mean that we are going to follow the pattern in every detail. We made it clear from the very beginning, since my government was set up, that we would negotiate the missile defense system by putting forward certain terms of cooperation in this respect. Also, we openly said that if this needed time, then it would simply need time, yes. Let me stress one more aspect. It seems important that Poland gains a better political comfort related to the decisions on this issue, and therefore it is with the highest respect that I've accepted President Bush's declaration that the United States would resume the effort of persuading Russia that the missile defense system project is neutral with respect to Russia. The strategy of protracting talks with the US was visible in the series of meetings held by Polish and American diplomats to discuss the matter. Poland received from the US diverse proposals pointing to different scenarios as part of which the Russians would be persuaded about the idea of the missile defense system. Among them was the US's proposal to have the systems monitored, under the condition that the Russians would agree to have their installations likewise inspected. All the options were unambiguously rejected, with the underlying political premise, which was made clear at the NATO-Russian summit in April 2008 in Bucharest. Interestingly enough, it was evident in the statements by politicians not only from Poland, but primarily from Germany. NATO is not against anyone and is not against Russia. We are going to build more robust structures, and the recent assurances show that Russia is our partner. The progressing expansion of NATO, the formation of military structures in the territories of its new member states, the planned deployment of the US missile defense system in Europe, all this doesn't add to building trust. In our opinion, Russia's dissatisfaction is not an argument in favor of the missile defense system. Something that's bad for Russia is not necessarily good for Poland. We believe that it would make sense to deliver the project based on a multilateral agreement. Let's be honest, we have withdrawn our troops from Vietnam, Cuba and Eastern Europe, and now NATO is opening their bases in Romania and Bulgaria. The negotiations held in this way, protracted talks, led to the decision that was made on July 4, 2008, the American Independence Day. Poland finally rejected the agreement to build the missile defense system proposed by the US. This was communicated by Prime Minister Donald Tusk at a press
To
conference.
rzecz ważna, także dla nas.
Installation of a missile defence system in Poland primarily increases the security of the United States. It is important also for us. It is important for the whole world in positive terms. Yet the fact that such a missile defence system would be situated in Poland increases several risks and threats, also to Poland itself. On that same day, Radosław Sikorski was called to meet the President at the National Security Bureau. Although top secret, the meeting leaked out to the media. Dziennik Daily reported on it in detail, though the meeting was held in a specially designed protected room attended by a minute clerk. President Lech Kaczynski, who advocated for the missile defence system in Poland, wanted to know whether the government had entered into an agreement with the Democratic Party politicians, then in opposition, and whether it was the reason for rejecting or disagreeing to the American proposal. He would ask Sikorski, among other things, about his meetings with the Democratic politician Ron Asmus. Of course, I know Radek Sikorski. He's an old friend of mine, one of the many I have in Poland. But there's been no agreement between the two of us on what Poland should or shouldn't be doing now or in the future. Witold Waszczykowski was present at the meeting. President Kaczynski was well aware of what American presence meant in terms of Poland's security. Let me remind you of that on his visit to the US in July 2007. He claimed that the missile defense system had almost been agreed upon and settled. After the election campaign kicked off, the issue was withheld. Sikorski addressed the Americans in the media. Don't take Poland for granted. Don't consider the business settled. Ron Asmus of the Democratic Party suggested to be continent. So the talks stood still for 6 months, while talks went on with the Russians and not with the Americans. We resumed them in April 2008.
Sugerował wstrzemięźliwość, więc na pół roku rozmowy zamarły. One toczyły się z Rosjanami, ale nie z Amerykanami. Wróciliśmy w kwietniu 2008.
What was the reason why Lech Kaczynski asked Radosław Sikorski during that secret consultation if he knew Ron Asmus, as we can learn from what's been publicly revealed? Ron Asmus was a member of the Department of State Staff, one of the deputies, earlier and later too, with the Democratic administration. He strongly spoke publicly against signing the contract with Bush, which became a fact on July the 4th, and encouraged waiting for the Democrats and Obama. Therefore, the president asked if Sikorski knew Asmus and if he took into account his advice to wait for the next administration.
Demokratów na Obamę. Stąd też prezydent pytał, czy Sikorski zna Asmusa i czy on uwzględnia te jego rady, aby poczekać na następną administrację.
Except that this sophisticated strategy has failed entirely, twice. First, with Russia attacking Georgia, showing its real face, what it always has been. As a result of Russia's attack on Georgia, the political situation forced those in power, Poland, to enter the missile defense system contract. Minister, you've said you were not in a state of dismissal then. I would suggest something, as it was disclosed to the public at the time. I wonder what your opinion is on what Prime Minister Donald Tusk said at a press conference in front of the office of the Council of Ministers when asked about the missile defence system. The conference basically concerned the related interview. I'd like to pick out a fragment and ask you for your comment, as this is a rare occurrence where Tusk presents his personal opinion on the idea to have a permanent American presence in Poland.
I ówczesny premier był pytany właśnie o kwestię tarczy i również w pewnym sensie cała konferencja dotyczyła też tego wywiadu, ale chciałem puścić panu słowa, i poprosić później pana o komentarz, bo to są jedne z niewielu słów Donalda Tuska, w których on mówi, jaki był jego stosunek do koncepcji stałej amerykańskiej obecności w Polsce.
As far as the negotiations, you were not driven by the interests of Poland, but you rather tried to prevent the merit being attributed to President Kaczynski. How about that? And could you please comment on MP Adam Bielan's motion that you should be put before the Tribunal of State? Minister Waszczykowski's information, sensational as it was, appeared many days after the motion for his dismissal was made. Therefore, I suggest that you don't take it seriously. Never have I had the opportunity to talk with Mr. Waszczykowski about any aspects of the negotiations other than Poland's security. I once had an opportunity to talk to Minister Waszczykowski one-to-one, and this was confined to his views as a negotiator of the terms he received from the Americans. He made it clear that he was a resolute enthusiast of the installation of the missile defense system, and, as he told me, he had been pushing forth a view for years that the US missile defense system in Poland, or any other American installation or system, is good by itself. The way Minister Waszczykowski negotiated, his view on the issue, strong and unambiguous as it was, did not fully reflect my own.
Sposób negocjowania przez pana ministra Waszczykowskiego, jego pogląd bardzo twardy, jednoznaczny w tej kwestii, nie oddawał do końca mojego poglądu na tę kwestię.
Pański pogląd nie
So,
oddawał do końca
your view did not fully reflect that of Donald Tusk. Permanent presence of American troops is at stake, mind you. And it would have essentially contributed to the security of Poland. This is why I receive these words today as a sort of commendation for me and my efforts. We actually had a few meetings and talks, and I explained to Tusk what was going on, and he was afraid it would be perceived as a success of President Lech Kaczynski, who had commenced the process earlier on. The political pressure President Lech Kaczynski exerted on Donald Tusk's government after the attack on Georgia yielded a success. Late in August 2008, US Secretary of State with President George W. Bush's administration arrived in Warsaw on invitation of Radosław Sikorski. At this press conference, it was announced to the Poles that a contract had been signed. As we have talked with the Secretary of State, the basic strategic objective is for our American partner to be interested in a certain configuration of powers in this country and in obstructing certain influences. It is an agreement, of course, which will help us to respond to the threats of the 21st century. It is an agreement that deepens the defense cooperation between Poland and the US. It does so, of course, in the context of our great alliance with NATO and our Article 5 commitment to one another in that alliance. It will help both the alliance and Poland and the US to respond to the coming threats. We have the right to believe that together we have brought about a genuine breakthrough as far as the security of Poland and of the United States is concerned. The presence of Patriot missile batteries, which will defend our territory, as well as the American facilities and installations, stands for a practical dimension of this groundbreaking agreement. Getting Patriot batteries had been considered earlier by the government led by Jarosław Kaczynski, as part of my first negotiations under the leadership of Ania Fotyga. At that point, Prime Minister Kaczynski postulated that 6 batteries be acquired. Tusk's government quit those plans. As a follow-up of the talks on the missile defense system with the US party, he would repeatedly claim that the system would diminish our security, with Poland to be exposed to attacks, and so on. And they demanded that the Polish army be modernized in a variety of ways. During a round of talks that was held in May 2008 in Rome, with me at the negotiations table, offered that they would bring a Patriot battery to defend the base. Not only did they offer money for the construction of the base and access to it, missiles, but they offered even more, that they would provide extra protection not only with airplanes from the Ramstein base, but also from the territory of Poland, with the use of the Patriot battery. I reported on this a while back in Poland, but the reply was, "That's not enough. Not enough. Not enough."
Dostęp do niej, rakiety, ale również podnieśli jakby poprzeczkę, że będą ją jeszcze ekstra bronić nie tylko przez samoloty, gdzie jest Ramstein, ale na terenie Polski przez baterię Patriot. Ja to przywiozłem do kraju, ale to było ciągle za mało, za mało i za mało.
Signing the agreement did not resolve the problem, though. The agreement should have been ratified by the Parliament and finally by the President. The President was interested, but the Parliament wouldn't hurry. In fact, nothing happened in this respect for years. Years afterwards, based on documents revealed by WikiLeaks, we learned that the US saw it was obvious proof that the process continued to be artificially protracted. When will the Sejm work on the missile defense system agreement? At the moment, I don't know yet when the Sejm is due to work on the ratification. Tomorrow, you can ask the Speaker of the Sejm, as he is co-hosting the meeting with the Secretary of State. So the question will certainly be posed. For Obama, this procrastination indicated that Poland actually didn't want the missile defense system. Earlier, in 2009, Obama was convinced to continue the project. The leadership of the anti-missile agency waited for something to occur. Defense Secretary Gates also wanted to take care of it. At the beginning of 2009, a meeting in Krakow of NATO ministers was held. On behalf of the President, I reached Gates's team and they reassured me nothing had changed on the US side. But there was no ratification on Poland's side.
Że nic się nie zmieniło po stronie amerykańskiej, ale nie ma ratyfikacji po stronie polskiej.
This means that the obstruction continued, now not over the signing, but ratification. As the ratification was withheld, the Americans couldn't start building the system. After all, the contract was signed with Condoleezza Rice in August 2008, and Obama had no problem going on about it. With no ratification, he'd wait for a year, and in September 2009 suggested another solution. He was about to start a reset with Russia then, flirting with Medvedev, and didn't need a missile defense system anymore.
On już wtedy flirtował z Miedwiediewem i tarcza mu też nie była potrzebna.
It took another 3 years for the agreement to be ratified. March 2011 saw the Sejm adopt the appropriate ratifying law. This means that almost 4 years had passed since the agreement was negotiated, and it took another 5 years for the construction to kick off. The first decisions and the groundbreaking ceremony took place in 2016.
poszły w ruch dopiero w roku 2016.
When we were reading the documents found in the Polish archives, they were not classified. They were just there, and nobody cared for many years. Based on the recorded discussions between Polish and American diplomats, we know with certainty that at a certain stage, as George W. Bush's second term neared its end and the negotiations were quite advanced, the deal between Poland and the US was about to be signed. There were some worries about the new Polish government not being as willing to sign, contrary to the preceding one. What do you remember from that time?
Podpisania umowy między Polską a USA. Co pamiętasz z tamtych czasów? To prawda.
That's right. It did slow down the process, indeed. Everything had been going on so fast, and suddenly the election came in Poland, with new politicians taking power. They were cautioned at the outset. I think that some Congress members who were not fans of George W. Bush cautioned them not to sign.
We wnioskach
The conclusions from Radosław Sikorski's visit to the US generally read that there was far-reaching consensus even between the Democrats and the Republicans as regards Bush's concept of the American missile defense system in Europe, Poland included. But Sikorski added one sentence. The definitely negative opinion on the MD among Senator H. Clinton's advisors is noteworthy. So, the hope was there. Such was an outline of the future policy that led to the official statement that the proposals of Obama, who had cancelled Bush's project, were optimum for Poland.
Przyszłej polityki, która doprowadzi do jakby oficjalnego stwierdzenia, że propozycje Obamy, który zlikwidował bushowski projekt tarczy antyrakietowej, są dla Polski optymalne.
I believe that the Russians played a considerable part in it, perhaps even threatened Poland if a system of this magnitude was to be deployed on its territory. I felt something like that could be taking place. They slowed the process down to wait for the next president, so the impetus of the project was decelerated. Then attempts at renegotiating it were made, and a project called the EPAA was devised. European Phased Adaptive Approach. You wanted to have a three-way arrangement, which is very hard to do, not willing to choose either one side or the other. And this is what should have been done. Of all the people worldwide, it was them who invaded your country. The choice was simple. Either you sign the contract or you sleep with the devil. But that was the mindset of the leaders. Hey, there's an opportunity to make a change, the character, to change what Russia has been, through the great deal with the US president. So come on collectively and let's change the world together. And Russia took advantage of that. But if I were a Polish citizen who has been through World War II, it would be very hard for me to accept that I wouldn't have a capability against Russia. This strategy ended on September the 17th, the date the US President dialed the Polish Prime Minister number here at the White House. He called to notify him that the United States had quit the project, given Poland's negotiation tactics. If Poland is reluctant towards such talks, there's no reason for the US to continue. The Polish Prime Minister did not answer the phone. Instead, he leaked to the press that he was a politician autonomous enough to not be bothered by an American president in the midst of the night.
Że jest takim samodzielnym politykiem, że nie będzie do niego dzwonił prezydent USA w środku nocy.
The De Veselu military base in Romania is a joint US-Romanian project, just like the Redzikowa base is a US-Polish project. Like Redzikowa, this place was designed and created in the 1950s as a Soviet element of the planned military attack on Western countries. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, countries like Romania and Poland joined NATO, but for years remained outside the real system of Western defence. Much earlier than that, it's so resolved. Poland had a chance to create such a base as part of a much more powerful system. The decisions made by the Polish government in 2008 to 2009 to finally break off the MD negotiations had one concrete effect. In this way, George W. Bush's Great MD project was overturned. Later, a somewhat differently configured system was set up. From the Polish perspective, the most important thing was that the decision taken at the time caused the permanent presence of US troops in Poland to be laid for a number of years. To be specific, it only came after Russia's aggression on Ukraine.
Że stała obecność amerykańskich sił w Polsce przesunęła się na wiele, wiele lat naprzód, a konkretnie na czas już po rosyjskiej agresji na Ukrainę.
Rozmawiając o tym wiosną 2023 roku, niejako w tyle głowy myślimy o tym,
Talking about this in spring 2023, we somehow tend to think at the back of our minds that our army is getting better and better, larger and larger, better and better equipped, undergoing a fundamental modernization change, purchasing state-of-the-art equipment. In 2008, 2009, 2010, this army was defenseless, entirely defenseless. Any opportunity to, pardon my French, let the Americans in so they could take over an area where they could install their weapons being most dangerous to the enemy, which would become part of the great global MD system, was in the vital interest of Poland, so to put it. Attempts to destroy this were, in a sense, a crime against the state. And this is something I really cannot understand.
To było po prostu dla Polski w żywotnym interesie leżało, tak bym powiedział. I próba zniszczenia tego jest w jakimś sensie zbrodnią stanu i tego naprawdę pojąć do dzisiaj nie mogę.
Here we are
in today's world. We've come to a point where some $10 billion or more was spent to build over 10 to 12 years a capacity that is controlled solely by the NATO policies just to defend Europe against an Iranian medium or long-range ballistic missile. This is a tremendous investment by the US, extending to 4 $2 billion Ibis ships, 2 facilities in Poland worth at least $1 billion each. In addition, there are the radars, the Ballistic Missile Defense Center in Ramstein, Germany, and the whole range of command and control. And all the command and control is not there to be able to defend any part of Europe against Russia. Now, we see what Russia is doing to Ukraine. That's wrong. That's what we're fighting against. And these assets should now be adequately adapted to the situation, to be capable of defending every NATO country in the face of a missile threat. Thus, the EPAA is just one small segment. The Russians use not only ballistic missiles, they are using drones, cruise, hypersonic and ballistic missiles. Despite this, right now, NATO has no appropriate policy in place to use anti-missile weapons against Russia.
Rosjanie strzelają nie tylko pociskami balistycznymi. Używają przecież dronów, pocisków manewrujących, hipersonicznych i balistycznych. A jednak mimo tego nie mamy teraz właściwej polityki. NATO nie ma polityki opracowanej w celu użycia broni przeciwrakietowej przeciwko Rosji.
Right now, NATO doesn't have a policy to use missile defense against Russia.
In its first version, as the large system, the missile defense shield was not only meant to defend Poland or the United States, it was a concept to ensure security to all countries of our continent, all the NATO member states as part of one common system. Breaking off negotiations in the respect brought about by Poland caused that the system was never created.
Doprowadzenie do zerwania negocjacji w tej sprawie przez Polskę spowodowało, że tak rozumiany system niestety nie powstał.
Jesteś blisko wszystkich naszych myśli, staje się realne to, co nam się przyśni, i wszystkie słowa wypowiedziane, bo jesteś naszym wrogiem albo naszym kołem.